Okay.
Hi, my friend.
Hello, my friend. Oh, this is
We
such,
actually are friends.
we really are and have been for some time. It's a privilege to be here with you, Deborah.
Likewise, Sarah.
And I want to thank all the hands that had anything to do with putting this extraordinary event together. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Mass, ICA, the larger community beyond. We've been invited to have a chance to reflect on critical issues of the day. The starting point for us both in this conversation is the way in which Mass inspired us to think anew about the work of the built environment and the way in which it can define who counts and who belongs in American life. We'll both reflect on Mass. Shall I begin with?
Please start.
Okay. One of the ways that I came to Boston here was at the invitation of Harvard to join the faculty to teach. And my first course became entitled Vision and Justice. It's a course that looks at the work of representation, the built environment, culture, images, for representational democracy through the vantage point of the founding of the country to the current day. And I found early on that the work of Mass, namely through the creation of, I would say, the most important monument of the 21st century, the Equal Justice Initiative National Memorial to Peace and Justice. Yes, we need some claps for this. Becomes the indispensable touch point to understand the work of culture for justice. It transformed my thinking in that course and in the work beyond. I was introduced to the project via Michael Murphy, who introduced me to the larger team at Mass, who I'm so thrilled to know now, and Alan Ricks and all of his colleagues. And going to the site in Montgomery gave me the experience of seeing the way that the civic landscape is a proxy for how power and race and justice have operated in the United States. And we'll speak more about this. But it became for me a way to also make realized a fundamental truth that I think is hidden in American society. We often look at the tensions of the founding of the country. It's a country that is built on an idea of abundance, in effect, of liberty and freedom, the tension with slavery as an unspeakable sentence. And we think that often law and norm alone has done the work of transforming our sense of who counts and who belongs. But when you look at the very definition of citizenship, defined by the Naturalization Act of 1790 as being white and being male and holding property, and you think of the current definition today, as a historian, I know, you look back over the centuries, you realize that it's not been the work of law and norms alone that have transformed our definition of belonging. It is often the work of the arts, of culture, of the built environment that gets us to know what we don't know about each other and about ourselves. And you can't think of the construction of culture, as I learned through engaging with Mass more, and then having my thinking transformed about the work of culture without looking at the work of architecture and the built environment in that equation. So I'm eager to hear how Mass transformed your thinking too.
So, thinking about exactly this, I went to Mass's website this morning, and the reason I have a piece of paper in front of me is I didn't want to misquote.
Yeah.
They say, "We believe beauty is essential. It is a measure of justice.
Yeah.
Beauty inspires connection, fosters belonging, and elevates the human experience. In a world where design has too often deepened inequities, beauty becomes a radical act. We understand beauty as the physical expression of value. Beautiful spaces signal that people matter." Now, mass design actually practices this, as everybody has heard today through the projects and as the project you just mentioned. And I would say I'd like to give a tiny shout out to Alan, and I know you don't like being the center of attention, Alan, but I got to know you because you are also capable of teaching this. So I invited you to Yale because you could teach the students to listen, to respect communities, to work through materials in detail and program, to to build buildings, not only did the students learn and flourish, but the people who would use these buildings would also learn and flourish. So to Alan as well and to Mass Design, I share Sarah's thanks.
Yes, yes. Thank you, Alan. Thank you. Yeah. So I have come to know Deborah in my life before coming to Harvard and have long admired your work as an architect. And I want to now think about your role also as dean and how teaching and working with Mass has made you think anew about the intersection between the built environment and justice in the United States.
So I have spoken for a long time using the expression built environment, social justice. I think that expression has fallen a little out of favor.
Yeah.
I've decided I'm going to use it till we don't need to use it anymore. I hope that comes soon. What does built environment, social justice mean? It means that everything we build, housing, libraries, schools, hospitals, civic structures, community centers, parks, infrastructure, all must meet the following standards. And these are our current minimal standards are not acceptable. I would describe it this way. The Flint water crisis, you may remember, was a built environment social justice issue. The Grenfell Tower tragedy in London was a built environment social justice issue. The Cross Bronx Expressway continues to be a built environment social justice issue.
Yes.
And I'm going to read a quote from Pete Buttigieg. The very fact that we have the phrase wrong side of the tracks in American English tells you something about how infrastructure, which is supposed to connect, can also be used to divide, often on racial lines. I won't read the length of his quote. Nobody's worse off when we reconnect areas that have been separated or segregated. And I don't know why anybody would be against us doing that when the whole point of transportation and infrastructure is to connect, not to divide. So I would say that the appropriate and just standards that we need for our built environment are the following. It has to be universally accessible. It has to be well-structured. It has to be environmentally sourced, constructed, and operated, has to be free from human suffering, and needs to be beautiful, to get back to this theme. Universally accessible means not just getting a wheelchair in. It means that all users feel welcome. That's universally accessible. Well-structured means built to last, with systems and structures that are stable, reliable, and offer the possibility for future adaptation. Environmentally sourced, constructed, and operated, everybody in this room knows that the built environment contributes more than 40% of the global carbon footprint. So everything we build going forward or rebuild or adapt needs to actually reverse the climate crisis. And free from human suffering means that no material or no product used in construction should be produced with forced labor, slave labor, indentured labor, or child labor, period. And finally, and most importantly, it should be beautiful. Because access to beauty should not be reserved solely for the rich. Every street a person walks down, every park their children play in, every school their child goes to, every community center their grandmother sits in with her friends should be beautiful, because to delight in one's surroundings is a universal right. So I look today, I was a huge fan when I was a young architect of Max Bond, a wonderful African-American architect in New York who, over the course of his career, served as chair of architecture at Columbia, dean at the architecture school at CCNY, served on the New York City Planning Commission, and interestingly enough, was a cousin of Julian Bond. And he said, and Sarah, I think this really relates to your work, architecture inevitably involves all the larger issues of society.
Indeed it does. I'm so moved by your comments, especially about the sieve of beauty as a means to understand what we deserve, the dignity of place as a means of reflecting how we honor human life. You know, I hadn't thought of this as a way to continue the conversation, but I came to this work in part because my father trained as an architect.
I didn't know that.
I didn't think I'd ever mentioned that to you. And he trained as an architect. He worked in the Peace Corps and traveled to Peru, other sites. helping create dignity in place through that training. And he didn't go on in that pursuit for various reasons, but he always instilled in me an understanding of the power of the built environment for how it is that you understand yourself. I had a grandfather who had an experience that conditioned me to think about the power of the arts for justice that I've spoken about. But your discussion about beauty made me go through my files here, as you're seeing, to pull something up moved me recently. One of the landmark leaders that's, I think, central for this conversation about the built environment, beauty, and justice is W.B. Du Bois. Spent time here, obviously, in Boston. And as I walk by the home he lived in off of Harvard's campus, because he wasn't welcome there, I think of generation time. I think of what he lived through, Woodrow Wilson's regime, instantiating segregation through the means in which we can and cannot move through spaces, and then the Harlem Renaissance, right, and beyond. And he delivers this speech about the importance of beauty for justice that I've just pulled up for my students and read from last week at the Du Bois Medal ceremony at Harvard. And he says a few things that I think are important to lay on the table. He begins by asking the audience that's gathered, it's then delivered as a speech, what do we want? And this is a period in 1926 of deep racial contestation. So he's saying, what is the thing we're after? And he goes on, he says, we want to be Americans, full-fledged Americans with the rights of other American citizens, but is that all? And he goes on and he says, even as you visualize these ideals of things you want, you know that's not really what you want. He says, after all, who shall describe beauty? What is it? Who shall let this world be beautiful? And he goes on, and he then says, anticipating the doubt in the crowd, what has this beauty to do with the world? What has beauty to do with truth and goodness, with the facts of the world? And he goes on, and I invite you to read this. It's readily available online, The Criteria of Negro Art. But he describes this indispensable relationship between beauty and the ideals we hold for ourselves reflected in the world around us, and truth and justice and representation. And it goes on to become the mission statement for much of what comes out of the Harlem Renaissance. So I think of this as he's also describing in the Souls of Black Folk the way in which dilapidated homes, right, in the Southern Belt convey a disregard, right, for Black life, for human life. Right. So we have in this conversation so many thinkers who have used the touchstone of beauty and the built environment as a means to advocate for what laws fail to do, what norms fail to do, right? Which is to convey how we must better take care of each other and ourselves in society. So, Du Bois, thank you for the model you've set with this. The framework of beauty, though, is one that we can't let, I think, be controlled by the Kants of the world, by those who are thinking about it in that context. It is central for our conversations today about belonging and who counts. One figure I want to bring into the conversation as we close is another leader, John Lewis. At the end of his life, he wanted to do one thing mainly, which is to be able to see the paved road that states Black Lives Matter as a mural fronting the White House, right? And what he is asking with that act, I think, is so fundamental to the work of the built environment, which is to say, what is the work required to claim the ground? We claim it through the work of the built environment. We claim it through the narratives that culture defines for us. We claim it by being able to state what has not been allowed, that Black Lives Matter. And I learned about, the importance of this intersection of art and culture and justice so much through his work. He invited me to speak at his penultimate Selma to Montgomery March that he made every year. And I was stunned that he knew anything about vision and justice, and he wanted to speak about culture and the power of the built environment for justice. It felt as if, as we were having the conversation in front of his congressional colleagues, that it was the unfinished work of the long civil rights movement to co-join the power of the art, of the artist, of the architect, of the lawmaker together in one arena to consider how we define these notions of belonging. So I want to salute that work as well as we're in conversation here. Do you have any concluding thoughts about your thoughts about beauty and justice and the built environment?
It's very interesting to me that you mentioned John Lewis, because of course, who among us didn't admire him enormously?
Mm,
And the example you give is so profound. I think what's important to remember is that design can be an instrument for meaningful change,
yeah.
and access to beauty for all is something we should continue to aspire to in every act we do in whatever creative field you're in. So
Mm.
thank you, Mass Design, for showing us how to do that.
Thank you. Thank you, Matt.